Hello, all, and welcome to today's session, engaging students early higher ed data collection from application to alumni. My name's Josh Straley. I'm going to be your, well, we'll call us a webinar coordinator today. Sometimes I call myself a master of ceremonies, but it's not too much ceremonies here. Before we get started, I do have a couple of notes on today's agenda. We're going to go through a little bit of housekeeping here, get you familiarized with the platform that we're using today called On24. I'll talk you through all of the modules that you're seeing on your screen and tell you a little bit about your options to engage with us during our presentation today. Then we're going to hop into our discussion with our panel. We'll cover all of our topics. There will be a moment for Q&A at the very end of today's session, so I do ask you that you stick around. But if you've got questions during any of the discussion today, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask those questions, and I'll make sure you know where to do that in just a moment when I get to my housekeeping slide. But first, I'd love to get to know our audience just a little bit. A couple of poll questions for you. First, what type of institution are you working with today? Who are you working with, and what brings you to our webinar? Or the questions I'm going to ask: are you with a 4-year institution, 2-year? Do you come to us from primary and secondary education, or are you coming to us from another industry entirely? If you can click directly on the slide that you're seeing in front of you, that'll allow you to answer. I'll give you about 30 seconds, and then we'll move on to my second poll question today. All right, I'll give you 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1, and let's go ahead and see what our audience is looking like. We've got about 30% from 4-year and 30% from primary and secondary. Well, welcome some of our 2-year colleagues as well, and some people from other. I'm interested to know what type of institutions those are. We'll get to that in probably a little bit. But welcome. I think you're going to enjoy the discussion no matter what type of institution you're from. Both Stephen and Robert on the call are going to give us some great discussion points. I'm really excited to tell their story with you today. But before I get to that, what brought you to today's session? I've got a couple of options here. They may not encompass everything that brought you to today's webinar, but if you're looking to learn, I'm looking to understand what you're trying to do with the learning that you're trying to do. So go ahead and give me an answer here as well. Same thing, if you click on the answer that best fits your category, I would appreciate it. I'll give you about 15 seconds to do so. Right. And 5 more seconds. 1. All right, let's go ahead and get a sense of what's bringing people here today. Interested in better integrating my school's forms with Salesforce? Well, almost any organization is interested in having better integrations. So that makes a lot of sense. And you're going to hear some great examples about how the panelists on today's call are handling that today, but also looking to improve digital student experiences. Love to hear that. I think that is a very, very common challenge that a lot of institutions today are trying to catch up with. Thank you. I always love to start off our webinars with a little bit of get to know you with the audience. But now I'd like to talk to you a little bit so you know how to get to know this platform. This is On24 that you're joining us in today. This is FormAssembly's webinar platform. It is great. A couple of things I want to draw your eye to. If you have any questions for me during the presentation today, you can actually ask those, and I'll get those answered as quickly as I can using the Q&A box that should be on the left side of your screen. I do want to make sure that you know that the interface that you're using is editable, configurable on your side. You can drag the screens around. You can move them around at your leisure. You can close screens if you'd like. So go ahead and mess with those. If you at any time accidentally close a screen that you didn't mean to close, at the very bottom of your screen is a toolbar. If you click those, it will open and close some of the module windows. You'll be able to open up the Q&A box, for instance, if you accidentally closed it. On the right-hand side of your screen, assuming you haven't dragged any modules around yet, you'll see a resources section. I've included some resources there as a part of this webinar, including some of the news stories that we'll talk about later today, some ebooks, and some other content that you can access immediately from this webinar. Feel free to take a look there. I hope you find something that is valuable to you. The one question that I want to head off that I typically get in every webinar is this session being recorded? Yes, it is, and we'll send this recording around to the email inbox that you used to register for this webinar in about 24 hours. If you give me till tomorrow afternoon, I'll get that into your inbox so you'll have access to it. Feel free to share it with anyone at your organization. So that does it for housekeeping today. Now we can introduce our panel, and I'll go ahead and bring them onto the screen. I'm joined today by Robert Mitchell and Stephen Crum. Guys, I'm going to go ahead and give you a second to introduce yourself. Stephen, why don't you go first?
Yes, great. My name is Stephen Crum. I'm the Applications Development Manager at South Texas College for Information Technology. Been there for over 11 years. I handle the application development. I also handle business reporting and data warehousing.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for joining us, Stephen. Robert, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great. Nice to meet everyone. I'm Robert Mitchell, the Director of Data and System Solutions at Economic Mobility Systems, or just EMS for short. And I've been here for a few years, but I've been in the higher education space for, I know I look young, but over 20 years. So started as an intern at a college at 19 years old and been in higher education ever since technology. So.
Nice, love it. And I appreciate you both bringing your expertise and your experience to us today. I'm really fascinated by STC's story and EMS's processes. I really can't wait to dive in. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and, before we get started, actually, I did have a news story that I thought would help frame our discussion for today. Just yesterday, our friends at Inside Higher Education, a higher ed publisher online, posted this news story, and I subscribe to their newsletters. And they were highlighting an article about how four-year schools are riding the dual enrollment wave, as they put it. Traditionally, community colleges and two-year institutions were more prevalent in this space, allowing high school students to enroll both at their not their alma mater, but their high school and a two-year school as a part of either a program to boost enrollment from high schools or to serve underserved audiences. Since COVID, the accrediting body in the US has seen a rise in four-year institutions attempting the same programs. They noted it was up 4% four-year college participation in dual enrollment programs was up 4% in the 2023-2024 school year, and they're projecting to reach 40% in that program just in the next year. One thing that I wanted to bring into this conversation, however, is that four-year colleges and four-year universities are struggling when it comes to seeing re-enrollment out of those programs. So they are managing to get students to do dual enrollment, but they're not seeing those students return and enroll as full-time college students once they graduate from high school. A challenge that is getting a lot of focus, and we'll touch on some of the things that we discussed today. So I found that fascinating. Our audience can find a link to this story in the resources section if you'd like to read more. It was a really fascinating read. So that does touch on our discussion today. And we'll talk about how South Texas College is actually administrating a very similar program. But before we get there, I'd love to invite Stephen just to talk a little bit about South Texas College and fill us in on what you guys are doing over there.
Great, thank you. I am from South Texas College, so we are on the deepest southern part of Texas that you can go to. So we're in the Rio Grande Valley. We operate in Starr and Hidalgo County. We have 5 campuses. We have 2 higher education centers, and we also have a virtual campus. We offer 130 degree and certificate options. We're the only community college in the state of Texas that offers 5 baccalaureate degrees. And one of the things that we're really known for is we've been a pioneer in dual enrollment. Since 2000, we've served 130,000 high school students with over 70 high school partners. So we've been busy.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible, Stephen. Maybe this is a chance for me to jump back to Robert, and I know that he's had a part in some of your programs there. Robert, why don't you tell us a little bit about economic mobility systems?
Yes, we're educational nonprofit, and so we focus really on impact work, and so we use technology to help drive equitable outcomes for college and workforce. And so whether that's tools that we develop for schools to help them track college readiness and helping to help students to be college ready or whatever they want to do, even if it's workforce, dual credit, doing uh, tracking also not only just to the high school, but to their workforce. So really trying to get that journey from high school, it may be as early even as ninth grade, all the way to workforce, connecting all those dots and using Salesforce. That's what we kind of live and die with, and tracking all that, bringing the community together in regional work. And so we'll bring K-12, higher education, community partners, workforce, all together in a region, and then we're all looking at the same data in a common Salesforce. And so that's kind of the big bet, that everyone has to be looking at the same data at the same time in the same way to really help serve the students and not have the data disaggregated. And so my role is to really help implement. Part of that is the Promise programs. And so we around Texas, we've been implemented over 10 Promise programs, even some outside of the state. But we are big FormAssembly users. Over 15 of our partners use FormAssembly. And I did a little exercise last week, Josh. I went and added up all the responses. We have over 900,000 responses across all our partners on FormAssembly. So almost a million. So hopefully next year we could brag and say, we got over 1 million responses from students, parents, educators with FormAssembly.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Robert, I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the reasons FormAssembly is hosting this webinar and bringing this together is one of the stories that I continue to hear from higher ed customers of FormAssembly is this need to be able to track student engagement across the student life cycle. And, your and Stephen's story here today is a great example of that, from being able to engage with students, at the high school level and continue with one contact record, with a consolidated, contact and record keeping experience, follow them all the way post-graduation and into the workplace. And it's not just about proving that your systems and your programs work, which is a huge part of this, of course. You want to be able to track the efficacy of your systems, make sure that you're serving the students and the audiences that you serve, huge part of it. But it also enables you to serve those students better when you have a single contact record. You don't have to ask them for their email address over and over. And just hearing how you and Stephen have worked together to implement that program with the school that you're working with, and your other clients, that's what I found so fascinating. And I know that's why a lot of our attendees are here today. So I can't wait to talk about that a little bit more. Before we do that, before we touch on the programs that are running well, I did want to ask Stephen, what brought you to EMS and Robert in the first place? What challenges were you looking to solve?
Yeah, so one of the things that we were looking for is that our technology for our CRM was very outdated. So we knew we had to get to a different platform. One of the things that we saw was the Dallas Promise, and Economic Mobility Solutions was actually pushing that and created a network of schools and partners, and we actually traveled up there to actually see that in action, and we were very impressed. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to bring that to South Texas College, and of course we wanted Economic Mobility Solutions as that partner. They led us in all senses of the direction, with the marketing, with the technology and everything, Robert being an instrumental part of that.
Very cool. Do you mind telling us a bit about the Valley Promise program? I know you brought some slides to support this, but I'd love to hear how your program might differ from the Dallas Promise program.
Yeah, so it's similar in lots of ways, but the main thing is that obviously our students get scholarships and things of that nature. This is really a last dollar initiative, and what that means is once all the scholarships are done, we actually worked on getting private partners to assist us with those funds in order for students to get all the way up to an associate's degree at STC. So we had over 1,000, we had over 1,300 pledges, and we had, or actually more than that, and we had about 1,100 actually accept and everything. And so they are actually in the STC Promise now. They have access to mentors. One of the things that we wanted to do using Salesforce, using FormAssembly, is we wanted to make sure that it was a simplified college enrollment process. And as we kind of push Salesforce to a more mature level, that will be our goal from start to finish as their college career finishes.
Very nice. And as I mentioned, I have conversations with higher ed institutions most of the year, and we've sponsored a couple of other webinars earlier this year. And one of the main things, the issues that everyone is trying to solve right now, and Robert, you mentioned it earlier, is data disaggregation, as you proved it, or as you termed it, or just decentralization of data, and this loss of the capability of anyone at a university to point to a single source of truth. And that's really making it hard for organizations to make data-driven decisions, or even worse, get different departments, different campuses all in line and looking at the same numbers. And that's where, the story that Stephen just told us, like, hey, we want Salesforce to be the source of truth, the centralized area, not just for staff, but also for students, so that they have the simplified enrollment experience. We can leverage the data we already have. That's a story I'm hearing all over, and I'm really impressed with how STC and EMS have worked together to build this system. Robert, maybe you can give us a little bit of idea of how exactly you architected the Valley Promise program.
Yes, so the program's based on having a roster of students, of eligible students, which is in most cases all seniors or juniors, and some may even go to say all the way from freshmen. And what we do is allow the student to opt in. So not everyone automatically is in the program. And so some of our programs, the college, for example, South Texas College is hosting the program. But for example, in Dallas, there's a nonprofit commit that hosts the Promise program and kind of facilitates on behalf of the community colleges and also the four-year colleges as well. But with the pledge form, they allow the student to opt in, put information about what their college and career interests are, also put in their parent and guardian information. That way, through Salesforce, we could also communicate with the parent and guardian about the Promise program and their student's path, and how can the parent support them in their path while they're still in high school. But also we allow the high school counselors to have access to view their students on who's pledged, who submitted a college application. So the college is sharing data back down with the high schools so they can see the data as well. And so really making everything visible so everyone can support the student all at once. And so it's fully integrated with Salesforce. We have a couple of forms that are connected to each other. I'll kind of get into a brief demo on how we're able to send data back and forth to Salesforce. But that's kind of how we've structured the program as far as with FormAssembly, and making it real easy for the student to get to, whether it's through a link, through a QR code, texting to them the link, or emailing them.
Fantastic. Yeah. And as our poll showed, I think a lot of our audience is very interested on how you manage to build that integration where data is flowing not just through forms, but then back into forms. Do you mind giving that demonstration now? I'd love to see it.
Sure. Let me get my screen pulled up so I can share.
Absolutely.
So first I'll start with the student perspective once I get my screen shared here. Okay, am I good to go, Josh? You see my screen?
We're seeing it now.
Okay, great. Okay. So this is from the student perspective. So this is what they would see, let's say, taking the pledge. So I'll kind of go through this, and we have a sample student here, a test student that's at Promise High School. This is their graduation year, their name, last name, their birthday. And so they would hit the next button and go to the next page and say, yes, we found your student record. So what really happened between hitting that next button and this coming back confirming that we found this student? I'll kind of dig in a little bit to the back end as to two things that happened and why we love FormAssembly. So here I'm on FormAssembly's page now. As you can see, everything is drag and drop if I wanted to change something here. Don't really need any coding skills to customize any of the fields here. But I'm going to go to the part on connecting it to Salesforce, and they have these automatic connectors. And so there's two types of connectors. One is maybe before form loads, and one is after you submit a form. So we're going to go to this form has been submitted. So that's when I entered the student's name, their birthday, their high school, their graduation year, and I hit it submit. What happened? Well, at that point, we actually pushed that data to Salesforce. And here we just selected what record in Salesforce did we want to create. We wanted to, in our case, we call this the promise roster log. And we just take the data from the form and plug it into the field in Salesforce. There's really nothing. If I wanted to add another field, I just say, I want to add this Salesforce field and I want to map it to this field in FormAssembly. So everything is pretty simple and drag and drop. You don't have to really do much coding, if at all, in order to connect this data. Yes, I will remove that. And so that sends it to Salesforce. And so the next part, though, is getting data back. I want the response from Salesforce to tell me, did I find the record? And so on this next page here, where we have a variety of scenarios of whether it found it or not. So I'm going to go to what FormAssembly calls a pre-fill. Before I reload the page, I'm going to go to Salesforce and look for it. So here, I'll skip the top part. I'm saying, go to the Salesforce account record and let me know, look up the birthday, the high school, the graduation year, and the first and last name. And if you find a record, I want you to pre-populate this field or this form with these fields from Salesforce. So I could actually bring back data from Salesforce and display it back out onto the page. It doesn't have to be all the data. It doesn't have to be any data. It could be whatever fields you want or that are necessary to display back out onto the page. So it's like writing a small little query without having to use SQL or anything like that. It's really just mapping the two fields. So once you're familiar with your data in Salesforce, if users are familiar with what the field names are in Salesforce, then they can easily map this data without the need of much help. And so what FormAssembly allows us to do is, based on what came back from Salesforce, I can have different conditions. So for example, the first condition I have, I'm checking if Salesforce came back and says it did not find that student's record, I have this message that would display, sorry, we couldn't find your record. Or what if the student already submitted the form? Well, Salesforce would tell me that. It would check a box that says, hey, this student already submitted, so I have a message for that. And of course, if we did find the student record, there's a message for that as well. And so it's all conditional formatting. I'll show you the conditional rules here. And again, it's really just in human language. You're not having to speak code language to say found is yes, and the pledge status is of this, then do this action. And so it's going to use all, not the background language, the API names and things like that users probably are not even familiar with in Salesforce. Is using everything that's in layman's terms for them to configure. And there's even a section here for hidden fields where I'm having certain data that's coming back from Salesforce I'm using to process and make decisions on what I display or don't display on the form. So that's what we love. It's bi-directional. You can send data to Salesforce and you can bring data back from Salesforce. And we really think that's the tool, the power of it. And for multiple objects, some tools may allow you to connect to Salesforce and only at a given time, push to one object or pull from one object. We can pull from. I got some flows or some forms where I'm pulling from 8 to 10 different objects. Is how complicated some of the forms can get to bring back onto the screen to display out to the user. So that's one of the great features of this.
Yeah, thank you, Robert, for showing that. I love that demonstration. I think that's a great way of showing, a lot of you in attendance today were looking for information on how to integrate your forms and your data with Salesforce better. And one of the things that I love about FormAssembly is that our product does make it very simple for you to send data over to Salesforce and pull it back. And to your point, Robert, yourself and people like you that partner with institutions, you have that technical knowledge, but so often you've got people like myself trying to work with a Salesforce integration, and it can become very difficult when an API and the terms that are where they don't have names of fields written in, as you put it, plain English, it can be very difficult to map those kind of things. And I'm very proud of that. We make it very simple. What I loved about what you just showed, though, is how you can use that data to not only make it easier for yourself to build forms, but talking to students through your form, letting them know that you were successful in finding their record. I know that, it's been many years since I was in high school, but I do remember how intimidating the college application process was. And that was, we had Blackboard at the institution that I went to, but it was before we really had a lot of these student information systems that made it a little bit easier to track your progress. And I love seeing, these digital experiences that you and people like yourself craft that make it that much simpler to say, oh, you already filled out this form, or, hey, we found your record. We're going to be able to pre-fill some of this information. That's really beautiful stuff. Thank you for showing that demo. And I think that gave a really good example of how you architected the Valley Promise program. I did want to ask you, how have you seen other institutions, beyond this kind of like Promise program, how have you seen institutions use FormAssembly or just Salesforce in general? What are some other examples of, better integrations of data that you've seen?
We got some of our institutions using it for their admissions application. Kind of the example you gave, they wanted to create something custom tied to Salesforce and build it themselves. And so some have their full admissions is going through FormAssembly connected to Salesforce. Some have their scholarship application on there, or event attendance if they want to capture who's attending certain events and track that in Salesforce. Recently, one of our K-12 partners is doing some of their continuing education. They got registration and quizzes for continuing education credit through FormAssembly. Community service forms for students to fill out their hours for community service or support requests, to put appeals, appealing their eligibility for a program. So while most do connect to Salesforce, there are some that may say, you know what, I just need this form up quick. I don't need it to go into Salesforce. So they may just have it go to a Google Sheet. Maybe it's a one-time form, it's temporary, we got this last minute event, and so within a few minutes, they build a form, have it go to Google Sheets, or some just leave the responses in FormAssembly, because that's another option. You don't have to have it go to an external source, especially if it's just a quick form where you're just needing to have a record of some type of response. And so we've seen it get really simple, or for example, admissions application, which can be a little bit more complicated, but it making it very easy and making it customizable, because you can base the questions based on the student's data that you may already have in Salesforce, or based on responses they made earlier in the form can dictate, what other questions they see later on. So we have many use cases that we've helped implement.
Very cool. Very cool. And I love that you showed off some of that conditional logic earlier as well. You can obviously build a lot on the answers that the form respondents are providing. Something else I wanted to talk to you guys about today, and Stephen, I'd love to talk to you about this. I mentioned earlier, a lot of the conversations I have with higher ed institutions are around the challenges that they're finding with data. Like, they don't have a problem really collecting data necessarily, but it's management of data, it's centralizing that data, it's kind of getting it into a format that they can view it and make decisions on. I'd love for you just to tell us a little bit about, in your position, the challenges that STC is seeing.
Yeah, so as our data goes off-prem and to more cloud solutions, kind of like Salesforce, that's just one of many cloud solutions that we're actually moving forward with. We got to figure out how to bring all the data back. So one of the things that STC did is we created a data management and integrity committee. I'm part of that committee, but basically what we did is before a lot of our data is going off-site to the cloud solutions, we kind of looked at it on premise, and we basically used Gartner's data maturity assessment to kind of figure out where we were with our data, where our data was going to go, what kind of safeguards did we need in order for our data to go into those places. So we basically created those benchmarks, and based on those benchmarks, what we're doing is we're basically working on creating a data warehouse. We'll either partner with somebody or do it ourselves. One of the solutions that we're looking at is Snowflake. And what we're doing is we're looking at bringing multiple data sets in from Salesforce, from Workday, from Dual Enroll. All of these vendors are now out in the cloud, and we want to make sure that our data is centralized in one location.
Well, I love that you spun up a committee for that. We have something similar at FormAssembly. You know, we consider ourselves data experts, and one of the things that when you start working with data is it's never one department's problem. It's never one department's data either. Ownership is a term that you can't really apply to data because it encompasses so much of your organization's workflows and processes. Everyone has a hand in it, and it's important that you don't make substantive changes to a contact record when perhaps your enrollment department is in need of exactly that box. And it can be that simple as removing a checkbox. It seems like it's unnecessary, but those changes do need to be discussed. And I love the idea of using Gartner's assessment. I'm going to have to take a look at that myself because I wonder, that sounds like something that every organization should participate in. I'm glad that you guys went through such a not formal process, but something that gave you an idea of where you stood in your data journey. One other challenge that I know is common with higher ed is compliance standards. And I know that Texas, the state of Texas in particular, was one of the forerunners in beyond state ramp. They have their own Tex ramp program. But how did that impact STC?
Yeah, so one of the things before Tex ramp, one of the things that we did is we used EduCause's solution, the HECVAT Lite. So it's very similar to the Tex ramp in a lot of cases in terms of the requirements, right? So we were already pretty familiar with a requirement base, making sure that they filled out this assessment. And then once the assessment's done, we were able to make a call whether or not it would be a good fit for the organization, or if they needed some other safeguards in place before we could actually use them as a vendor. One of the things about Texas RAMP is it stands for the Texas Risk and Authorization Management Program. One of the biggest things about that is it's continuously monitoring these vendors, and it basically publishes a list on the DIR site where you can go and basically look and see what vendors have actually, basically got their certification in order to move forward. And obviously Salesforce is there in many different colors, and FormAssembly is there as well. So that's one of the things that we were able to move forward with knowing that our data would be secure moving forward, and then obviously Economic Mobility Solutions leading that charge with us with FormAssembly and Salesforce.
Yeah, and Robert, speaking of EMS, is this, I know this for a fact. It's not, I know that every Texas State University and college comes under the auspices of Tex ramp, but is this something that every school is able to tackle, or how is this impacting other schools that you've worked with?
I think the biggest impact, right? I think no one's going to push back on more trust, more security, more compliance, and to a certain degree as far as keeping student data safe, right? That's a primary goal. But I think the challenge is what's the cost tag to do so, right? And so you have some of these things that are compliance that should be enforced, but they don't necessarily get, especially the state schools, more funding to purchase the higher level compliance tools that they need. So sometimes they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. But I guess what we've been trying to help the schools to think about is when evaluating tools, some of the ones that have that trust, and if they have that trust, then they're going to charge more money because they've earned that trust, right, with their product, is which tools are really going to help you maybe save on your human resource time, right? So if you're going to get a tool, it's going to cost more, plus it's going to be very intensive drain on your IT department. Then that's a double-edged sword, right? Versus maybe you get a tool, And it's a low bar for your IT department, if at all, right? I think even with building this out for South Texas College and their Promise program, it's rare I have to even contact Steven for anything. I just keep them up to date with what we're working on, and the users are really maintaining it. A user can go in there and connect another field, right? If their security is set up for them to access that field. So I think really looking at really what's the human resource cost and how can you save it with usability, how fast can you learn it, what's the maintenance, and that really maybe can offset some of the cost of getting, I think, a lot of these products called like the government edition, right, that have this, FedRAMP compliant security as well. And so I think that's really been a factor in helping them to come to better decisions, is not just looking at the price tag, not just looking at what it can do, but what is it going to cost us as far as our man hours in accomplishing that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I know everybody on this call is going to be even more familiar with this than I am, but schools are coming increasingly under these compliance requirements from the state level or from the federal level. And in the meantime, enrollment, hopefully not at every institution, but across the board is trending down, and that's one of the challenges that the article that I highlighted earlier points out, is that with 5% decrease in enrollment. So with less budget, organizations are being asked to meet higher compliance requirements. And again, Texas is one of those early states to push that requirement, but state RAMP as a program is rolling out to more and more states. And I know at the federal level, there's also FedRAMP for federal institutions. And we're all privy to the news that we see every day. Data security is becoming more and more important. So we understand that these programs are important, but even to your point, or pardon me, Robert, to your point, the funding isn't necessarily coming to match that. And so finding, benefits and finding software that can make it easier and to your point, kind of two birds, one scone, as I like to say, saving perhaps some bandwidth or some budget at the human capital or human resource level if you're going to be purchasing software equipment is one way to handle that. And I love you putting that out there. Before we move into questions, and I want to tell our audience that, this is a live session. If you have any questions for Stephen and Robert, go ahead and use that Q&A module. I'd love to get those answered for you before we leave today. I wanted to ask you both what's in the future for you. Speaking of, programs that take a while to implement, what's in the future for STC? And Robert, what's in the future for EMS and your clients? Stephen, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so Robert already knows this, but we're going to expand our Salesforce application to start including traditional students, not just the Promise, not just that cohort. The whole idea is to get everybody on Salesforce so they have a kind of a one-stop shop to basically get where they need to go. And they're able to track themselves through the course of being at STC or maybe another institution as well as they move forward with their college career.
Fantastic. I'll keep in touch, Stephen. Once that project's done and you're on the other side, I'd love to hear how you guys manage that, because a lot of institutions that I've spoken to are looking to replace aging student information systems with Salesforce, and there's challenges with that. I'd love to hear how you get through that, and I'm rooting for you too. Robert, what do you see in the future? Maybe not just for EMS, but for the higher ed clients you work with.
One cool thing that just launched for us with one of our bigger clients is Dallas County Promise, which serves 25,000 seniors, every year, is we've partnered with the Common App. And so what we're piloting now is a student that takes the pledge. At the end of the pledge, it actually will connect them to the Common App and bring over all that information they've entered and pre-populate the Common App with a ton of information the student doesn't have to re-enter. And so kind of thinking from the student experience, right? They're re-entering information for their college app, for financial aid. It's all the same information a lot of times, right? And so what we're trying to do is to streamline that. And so because Dallas County Promise gets, over 90% of the 25,000 students to take the pledge, we figured that was a great entry point to introduce them and hand them over to the Common App, where it will create their account, pre-populate the data. If they selected these 3 colleges they're interested in, it automatically kind of populates that in the Common App for them to prompt them to fill out the apps for those colleges as well. And so we're real excited about this pilot program, because if it's successful, it'll have a big impact, with that many seniors every year. And then hopefully we could do this in other regions as well. And so we're using FormAssembly as that go-between of connecting them to the Common App. So FormAssembly is involved in this to where, again, when they finish the pledge, they click a button, it sends them to Common App, and then Common App sends them back to the pledge form or FormAssembly to confirm that it was completed. And so, we were really stretching the limits of the use cases of FormAssembly, and so we were able to get that to work. And so we're really happy about this, and look forward to share our results with other regions as well that may be interested in doing something like this.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And like that article we shared earlier, this is not a unique problem, but I do think that you, EMS, and STC have a unique solution, in making these dual enrollment programs, these promise programs, capturing the interest of students early on in their high school career and making it easier for them to apply. I would love to see you buck the trend of, that a lot of institutions are struggling with. I think you're taking all the right steps. You're easing the student experience. You're keeping that data clean and secure. It's a great story. And I do want to thank both you and Stephen for coming on today and sharing that. Just the impact that you and your institution, your respective organizations have already had, 70 associated partner high schools, 25,000 students in the Dallas Promise program. I mean, those are some great numbers and a lot of people that you've helped out. That's really, really cool. I'm not seeing any questions in our Q&A box today. I do want to tell our audience, if you've got any questions, slip them in and I'll still get them answered. Before I let everyone go, I just want to say, hey, if you haven't met FormAssembly, Robert did a great job of showing just how institutions use forms connected to Salesforce to, ease implementation, to make it easier for students, to make it easier for staff to manage forms. We do that for hundreds of schools around the nation and abroad, outside of the US. So if you're interested in learning more, seeing how to do this on your own or through a partner like Robert and like EMS, please go ahead and schedule a demo with our team. We're happy to hook you up with an implementation partner as well, and we're obviously happy to give you a demo. I do have some other resources for the audience before you leave. We, as I mentioned, sponsored another webinar that talked about the challenges that Stephen mentioned on, data centralization, making better decisions with data. That took place back in October. That's available on demand to this audience if you'd like to learn a little bit more about, not just the challenges, because I know you are familiar with the challenges, but the other solutions that institutions have been seeing. You can go ahead and check that out. I've also got an ebook and a lookbook of just some examples of higher ed forms. If you're looking for inspiration, feel free to grab that from our resources section and the article I mentioned earlier today. And if you'd like to get in contact with Robert, grab a quick screenshot of his email address there. I'm not able to include that in the resources section, but I know he's interested in having conversations as well. Gentlemen, I want to thank you again. Before I let the audience go, do you have any final thoughts? Or would you like to say goodbye?
Thank you for having us, Josh, for bringing us together. Appreciate the opportunity to share.
Yeah, no problem. And I really appreciate the stories that both of you brought. It's some really great work. And while some of it is powered by some pretty technical stuff, it's still, at the end of the day, it's serving audiences better and it's accomplishing your institution's goals. Stephen, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'll give you a chance to say goodbye as well.
No, thanks for everybody attending. And if anybody's interested in reaching out, you can definitely reach out. Definitely, I can answer some questions, anything that comes my way. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you both again. Audience, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to FormAssembly. Visit formassembly.com. We've got all of these resources available in our resources library at any time. And if you're looking for webinars, you can sign up for additional webinars in our webinar section. With that, I'll give everybody back a little bit more of their Tuesday. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you at the next one.